Back. Well, this morning we had said earlier that we want to look at the president's speech, but we're going to concentrate on what he first started the speech with on the 29th of May. It started telling us about the fight against corruption, how he's going to fight it headlong. And that's what we're going to be doing this morning. With us this morning, we have a legal practitioner and an entrepreneur. Is Adeyemi Ibirunke. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Welcome to our studio.
Good morning, good morning. I'm pleased to be here today.
Okay. I know that most people had seen the speech and you've read Mr. President's speech.
That's correct.
In total, what do you feel?
Well, if we are keeping in mind that this is the Democracy Day speech in the third year of this administration, my opinion is that it's pretty lackluster, because it seems more like a speech that is an inaugural speech, where we are hearing promises of what we expect to get from a government, as opposed to a speech celebrating democracy and what the government has actually achieved.
But some people said the speech was hopeful. It sounded hopeful.
Yes, it may sound hopeful, but my reasoning is how much or what's the measurement for that hope. Now, if we look at it in real terms, I'm looking at it from the perspective of, okay, security, corruption, and the economy, which are the three major points that Mr. President raised and discussed in his address. And you find that over the past 3 years of this administration, we haven't achieved as much as the Nigerians expected.
Okay, we'll go on this break and we'll be right back. Please stay with us.
In this fight. Various policy measures already put in place to stem the tide of corrupt practices are yielding remarkable results. Some of these key reform policies include: A, the Treasury single account has realized billions of naira being saved from maintenance fee payable to banks. 200 billion naira has also been saved from elimination of ghost workers in public service. B, the whistleblowing policy has helped to recover over 500 billion naira. C, the Prudential Initiative of Continuous Audit set up was amended to validate controls, assess risks, prune personal costs, ensure compliance with public financial management reforms, has helped to identify and remove over 52,000 ghost workers from the federal government MDS payroll. The Voluntary Assets and Income Declaration Scheme, aimed at expanding tax education and awareness, has offered the opportunity for tax defaulters to regularize their status in order to enjoy the amnesty of forgiveness on overdue interest, penalties, and the assurance of non-prosecution or subject to tax investigations. The Sovereign Wealth Fund project portfolio has been expanded.
Welcome back. Well, we're still going to bring that speech back to us, but before we went on that break, we were talking about this speech being hopeful. Lots of people had said, at least we're just starting. They're just starting. It's 3 years, and so we should give them time.
Well, that's true. Now, governance actually takes work, it takes time, and it takes consistency. But I'm judging it based on expectations of Nigerians and what the administration promised coming into office. Has that expectation been met? No. Is it close to being met? No. And that's why I'm saying, yes, it might seem hopeful in terms of the promises that we are still hearing this year, but how hopeful do we expect? Do we have a framework in place with regards to achieving what is being promised?
Okay, you said that the president made a speech on Democracy Day, which is not fit for that day. You said that it's more like making promises, and he's supposed to be making a speech as regards Democracy Day in Nigeria, right?
Yes.
Now, when you assess democracy in Nigeria as of now, what's your take?
Yes, democracy really is still young in this country, like we all know. And what my expectation was from this year's Democracy Day speech was actually celebrating our democracy in terms of achievements that we have gotten.
Have we achieved much?
We have achieved over the past 17 years of democracy in Nigeria. But I'm saying achievement in terms of freedom of speech, achievement in terms of quality of life, achievement in terms of security, achievement in terms of economy. We seem to have stalled. And that is why I'm saying it seemed more like an inaugural speech promising what to expect rather than a speech of an administration that had been in office for 3 years saying this is what we've done, and assuming they don't get a second term. In the next 1 year, this is what.
But in his speech, he itemized lots of achievements, which he said he has done.
Yes. Now, for instance, the clip that just played, he mentioned the saving 500 billion
yes.
and discovery of 52,000 ghost workers.
Yes.
Okay. Now, that's something that was done. Now, it now goes back to almost like what a thief would think about in terms of, I'm only a thief when I get caught. So we have 52,000 ghost workers in the system who has been benefiting from all these monies over the past 3 years. Mm-hmm. Nobody has said anything about that. Is
that not an achievement?
In terms of?
You said nobody has said anything about that. But he said right now, they've stopped that.
Yes.
So is that not a kudos to them?
It's a kudos, but it's only a kudos to the extent of this is what we've discovered and what we've plugged. But it doesn't deter somebody else coming up, playing smarter on the system and getting away with it.
Okay, you said something while I wanted you to itemize it, but the question came in. Yep. You talked about the quality of life. Are you saying you've not gotten it in this administration? Are you comparing it to the previous administration?
Well, I'd have to sadly compare with the previous administration because, like I said, the speech seemed more like an inaugural because there was a lot of comparison with the previous administration. Okay? Now, quality of life. Mr. President did mention the fact that the Chibok and Dapchi girls were recovered. But we are forgetting that the Dapchi girls were actually abducted in February of this year under Mr. President's watch. And 110 girls were abducted, 104 were recovered. Now, quality of life. In my own experience, it has seemed that we, as Nigerians, we place more priority on property than human life. Now, one Chibok girl, one child, is as important as any other Chibok or Dapchi girl. So we cannot celebrate and be happy about the fact that, oh, we got back 104 girls. What about the missing 6?
Okay, we want to also look at, because we're focusing on corruption this morning.
Yes.
When he started his speech, he talked about fighting corruption, and it was like a scorecard. It was like, we've done this, and but looking at it, do you think we've actually fought corruption? Can we actually fight corruption? Stand still.
Well, you know, it's a system. We are all products of the system in place. And Mr. President in his speech talked about international and Nigerians applauding the fight against corruption. But if we look at statistics, Transparency International's latest report shows that we are still not doing well on the corruption index. In fact, we've fallen in that regard, and we still scored 28 over 100 on the index. So I think we have not done well. Now, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier on, that if we look at it from the perspective of deterrence, you can only deter when we have, convictions. People are being punished. There are consequences for corruption. But now it's just like, okay, I'm caught. Then there's a recovery, and then life goes on.
Plea But you saw what happened yesterday at the court, where the ex-Taraba state governor was sentenced to jail, 14 years in jail.
Yes, and I applaud the law enforcement agency. They were able to get that conviction. But I think the celebration is premature because it was just a conviction at the trial stage. There's still an appeal process, there's a court of appeal, there's the Supreme Court, and anything can happen in that process.
Okay, as regards the Chibok girls and the Dapchi school girls that were recovered, now when we voted, Nigerians voted President Buhari into power, we had this courage in him that he would fight corruption and terrorism, being a uniform man. Now when he came into power, all of these started to happen. Now it is an achievement that the Dapchi schoolgirls were retrieved, but then it was actually through negotiation. Would you say that right there is a fight against terrorism, negotiating? And how has the fight against terrorism been?
Well, in my own opinion, I see the fight against terrorism from 2 points. There has to be the legal fight and then the actual military aspect of it. Now, military aspect also covers intelligence gathering. Legally, it took a while because I think it was several years ago. I wrote a paper in the US, and almost as if I foresee what terrorism became in Nigeria today. Oftentimes we seem to let things slide, and then this cancer builds up until a point where we've lost control. This administration is yet to take a very firm stance when it comes to legally fighting terrorism, in terms of putting a legal framework in place that punishes terrorists and immediately identifying terrorist groups and putting them out there for international communities as well as the Nigerian law enforcement agencies to know. Negotiation, you cannot negotiate from a position of weakness. It was premature going into negotiations with Boko Haram when they were still pretty much in charge of the Northeast. Nigeria should take steps to fight legally and militarily to shut down the scourge and then discuss negotiation.
Okay, looking at all of this, some people have said that the fight against corruption is one-sided. And another party has been alleged that this fight is not one-sided. At least we know people that, we begin to know people that are, amassing wealth, the federal wealth to themselves. Looking at the looters list, do you think those that said this is one-sided, they are correct with what you've seen on ground?
When you say one-sided,
that maybe the other party, partisan.
Oh, okay. Unfortunately, that's the impression.
But to you, is that it?
It would seem so, because like for instance, I think it was a couple of months ago, or was it last year, when the $25 billion NNPC issue came up. As a country, we talked about it, and then when the next headline came, we moved on. And we've had like series of such incidents that take place, and then it's only when it's headline news that we really discuss it. Once it's no longer the major news, we move on. So that's why people may have the opinion that, yes, it might be partisan, and what about these people that are in the right party? How come they're getting away with some of the things they're doing?
So how can we really fight corruption holistically without being biased or without being said that one is biased? Because if we do it this way, We might say, hey, he's doing it this way to this way, and you do it that way. We might say, because the president in his speech said he wants Nigerians to support this fight. So what's our role here?
I think our role is to continue calling out the government. Okay? As Nigerians, as electorates, we have the God-given right, the constitutional right to make demands of our government, certain demands of our government. And one of it is improved and unbiased enforcement of the laws. In fact, it's imposed statutorily for them to enforce the laws without bias. So we'll continue calling them out as Nigerians. It's something we need to do to make sure that we put our government in check.
Now, every day on the reports, on the papers, on the news, we hear allegations. So amount was looted, so amount was being paid to so person, that politician. And on the papers today, we even read Jega alleged that the Senate is filled with bribery and the likes. Why is nobody coming out to charge these people to court?
Good question. Now, you see, this is where I talk about a system. Unfortunately, I think in Nigeria, we look at our problem as this big thing that is up there. But we fail to break it down to individuals, you and I, common man on the streets, because it all starts from the I. Now, if I have the money to buy 3 cars, and my neighbor does not have a car, but there's just a space for each apartment to park 2 cars, then by buying the 3rd car, I'm going to have to encroach on that person's right and hope he never gets the money to buy a car so that I don't have to move my car. So it starts from the I. It's going to take deciding consciously to improve ourselves by improving the next person so that we grow together as a nation. So it's until we start doing that, then we're still going to be a problem that is in the clouds as opposed to a problem that we can deal with by common sense.
Okay, maybe we need to see the video again and watch what Mr. President has said.
Continue to support us in this fight. Various policy measures already put in place to stem the tide of corrupt practices are yielding remarkable results. Some of these key reform policies include: A. The Treasury single account has realized billions of naira being saved from maintenance fee payable to banks. 200 billion naira has also been saved from elimination of ghost workers in public service. B. The whistleblowing policy has helped to recover over 500 billion naira. C. The Prudential Initiative of Continuous Audit set up was amended to validate controls, assess risks, prune personal costs, ensure compliance with public financial management reforms, has helped to identify and remove over 52,000 ghost workers from the federal government MDS payroll. The Voluntary Assets and Income Declaration Scheme, aimed at expanding tax education and awareness, has offered the opportunity for tax defaulters to regularize their status in order to enjoy the amnesty of forgiveness on overdue interest, penalties, and the assurance of non-prosecution or subject to tax investigations. The Sovereign Wealth Fund project portfolio has been expanded with an injection of $650 million United States dollars so as to strengthen its investments in local infrastructure, power, health, reconstruction of Abuja-Kano Road, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, East-West Road, and the Mambila Hydroelectric Power Project, as well as the construction of the second Niger Bridge. The fight against corruption through the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission has resulted in recoveries of billions of naira, as well as forfeiture of various forms of assets. This, alongside other efforts, has improved Nigeria's international image and regional cooperation. We have retained the services of one of the world's leading asset tracing firms to investigate and trace assets globally. This is in addition to the exploitation of provisions of existing treaties, conventions, as well as bilateral agreements with multilateral bodies and nations. Nigeria has also signed mutual legal assistance agreements to ensure that there is no hiding place for fugitives. This administration has therefore focused on revamping the ailing economy it inherited in 2015. In 2016, government executed an expansionary budget and developed the strategic implementation plan. For the first time, 30% of the budget was earmarked for capital expenditure, which represents an upward review when compared with the 2015 budget. The SIP was followed by the development of a comprehensive medium-term plan, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2020. The broad strategic objectives of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan were to restore and sustain economic growth, build a globally competitive economy, and invest in our people. The implementation of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan has started yielding results. The National Bureau of Statistics reports that the economy grew by 1.95% in the first quarter 2018, which is a good performance when viewed against minus 0.91% in first quarter 2017 and minus 0.67% in first quarter 2016 respectively. Our foreign reserve has improved significantly to $47.5 billion United States dollars as of May 2018, as against $29.6 billion United States dollars in 2015. The inflationary rate has consistently declined every month since January 2017. Recently, government conducted focus labs in 3 key sectors of the economy, namely agriculture and transport, manufacturing and processing, as well as power and gas.
Yes, welcome back. You've heard the president again.
Yes.
I'm talking more about all of these issues, very important issues. But today we're focusing on corruption, so we want to look at, because we know that corruption has eaten deep into every fabric of the society. And the president came with that, saying he's going to fight corruption. And he said he's fighting it headlong. It's not going to relent in fighting corruption. But where do we start from?
We start from the framework. We start from the ground and build back up. Now, Mr. President was right when he started off saying that if we do not fight corruption, corruption will destroy Nigeria. And you have also raised a good point that corruption has eaten into the framework of this nation,
yes,
which was the basis of our votes for this administration. Nigerians voted overwhelmingly for Mr. President because we recognized the fact that corruption is a problem in Nigeria. But we cannot fight corruption with corruption. We cannot fight corruption with a system that is defective.
Are you saying this administration is being corrupt?
is being corrupt.
Yes.
Well, that is the impression of the majority of Nigerians. Why? Because if we look at the people that are punished for corruption so far, people that are, some would argue, persecuted rather than prosecuted for corruption, it seems one-sided. Whereas corruption is something that, like all laws, should be fairly and impartially administered. So we should tackle, the only way we can tackle corruption as a nation is at every arm, every sector of government, right from the grassroots all the way up. We fight corruption, we deal with corruption, and we punish corruption.
Okay, you said something I wanted you to be more explicit.
Okay.
You said we cannot fight corruption with corruption. I wanted you to explain that.
Now, like I said earlier on, I said oftentimes we make the mistake of looking at the corruption problem in Nigeria like it's a myth. It's something that is out of control. Not looking at it from the perspective of corruption is I. Starts with me. Okay? Now, why do we talk about corruption? The fact that I feel I want to get more comfortable than the next guy, then I feel the urge and succumb to the greed to amass the wealth. But if we decide that let us be content, let us go back to what we were as a nation in the days when we had pride, when we had pride in our national identity, when we had pride in our integrity, then we'll know that, okay, this corruption starts also with how do I treat my neighbor? Am I decent to my neighbor? Do I respect him? But you cannot fight corruption in a system where you have the majority of Nigerians that are looking at it from, let me wait for my time. You know, let them do their thing. Don't get too close. But when I get there, I'd also have an opportunity to do my own thing. Okay. And I think that's the majority of the mentality out there.
What do you have to say about the judicial system in Nigeria as an agency or an arm of government that is put in place to fight, curb all of these things? Are they doing well enough?
That's the interesting thing about the law, which is why people often say the law is an ass. Now, unlike public opinion and or what they call the courts of public opinion, it might be fine to say, oh, that man is a thief. And then people will be like, okay, yeah, he doesn't have a job. How come he drives a good car? And people start assuming. But when it comes to law, you cannot assume. You will deal with facts. So oftentimes, and that's why I said our excitement over yesterday's conviction might be premature, is that oftentimes when facts are presented to the courts, there is a particular level of requirement that you need to satisfy to get those facts admitted, to get those facts to prove your case before you can come to a conviction. So that's what the judiciary might be handicapped to. I'm not saying the judiciary is perfect. I'm a lawyer. We are far from perfect, even as lawyers and the judiciary, because we are parts of the system. We are Nigerians. We are the system. You cannot give what you don't have.
Okay,
so
but
are you saying that the prosecutors generally are not doing well enough as regards investigations and facts and figures to probe these the people that are guilty of these things?
Now, I would not jump to that conclusion about the prosecutors not doing well enough. Like I said, criminal law is different from other aspects of law, civil law, commercial law, and all that. The standard in criminal law is proof beyond reasonable doubt, which is a much higher standard. In other words, you have to cross your T's, dot your I's, and make sure that you're on point to get a conviction. But the advantage we have in Nigeria, seemingly advantage the state has in Nigeria, is that our law still allows some prosecutorial impropriety, if I may use that word, because evidence improperly obtained can still be tendered in our courts and admitted and used as a basis of conviction. Unlike in the US, where there is a much higher standard. The courts in the US, up to the Supreme Court, has determined that the state is almost all powerful. So they hold the state to a higher standard. You cannot bring in improperly obtained evidence. So I was hoping in Nigeria, our prosecutors will leverage on that to say, okay, even if without a search warrant, I say, okay, I get access to this information on corruption, I can still tender it and get a conviction. But I don't think we've exactly done that. We've gone that far to obtain evidence.
Okay, I want us to look at our institutions. Are they really weak, in fighting this corruption? Looking at the institution and looking at what is obtainable now, do you think we have strong institutions?
We have laws, which is funny because oftentimes people take it for granted. They assume, oh, people do a lot of things in Nigeria and there are no consequences. But actually, there are the laws in place. It's just that oftentimes the laws have probably not been enforced, or nobody has taken it up to say, okay, I want to punish for this thing. Our institutions are still a product of who we are. We are the institutions. I'm going to be the judge. I'm going to be the lawyer. I'm going to be the prosecutor. I'll be the, So it is still us as individuals that make these institutions. So it's going to take the I deciding to improve myself, all of us coming together to decide that corruption is not bad when I'm not getting anything from it. Corruption is bad because corruption is bad.
Okay, what would you want to see from this administration for you to know that? What would you want to see for you to know that they're actually fighting corruption? What are the things you want to see in place? So that you know maybe if they are being biased or not. What are those things you want to see?
I want to see a much more detailed and strategic investigation and prosecution. I think the problem we've had over the past 3 years of this anti-corruption war is that even our law enforcement seems to pander more to the court of public opinion than do due diligence investigations and present facts to the courts.
Why did you say that?
Good. Now, for instance, I think it was, I don't think it was last year, I think it was 2 years ago or so, when there were these raids on the apartment of certain justices of the courts.
Yes.
And it happened by that very morning. It was all over the media. Oh, we got this much money from this person. We did this, we did that. Further raising expectations of Nigerians. People are thinking, oh, okay, the judiciary must be corrupt. If you get the money, then take them to court and get them convicted. And then over the next period of time, it fizzles out. And people are like, really? So this is where we are getting it wrong. We don't need public opinion in the fight of corruption. We don't need to prove to Nigerians that, oh, every day we have to go out to say, okay, we got 10 naira from this person today. Nigeria is corrupt. We got 15 naira. Nigeria is fantastically corrupt. No. We need to investigate. The law enforcement agencies need to know that their job is not get Nigerians convinced that they are doing something. They can only convince us of what they are doing by convicting suspects.
Okay, there have been agencies put in place, like the EFCC, the ICPC, which have been put in place to fight these corruptions and the likes. I want you to do a general review, especially the EFCC. How have they been doing in the fight against corruption?
Personally, I've been unimpressed. Now, it still boils down to what I've been pretty much saying from the beginning. Maybe I should use this example. There's the Mueller investigation in the US. Since his appointment as special counsel, I've not seen him on TV saying, oh, I'm chasing this person. I caught this person on tape saying this. No, because what he's more interested in is, this is my task, this is my goal, what do I need to meet as standards to meet that goal? But EFCC, on the other hand, and institutions in Nigeria seem more, almost as if trying to convince us that they are working. In that desperation, they seem to overlook the facts. And maybe I should leverage on my experience as a lawyer that's practiced here in Nigeria as well as in the state of New York, USA. My experience in Nigerian practice has almost shown that like this chap, African China song, Rich Man Steal Money, you know, there's this song that he had back in the days, which I might say to an extent is true. Because you'd find the average Nigerian committing a crime.
I'm going to allow you to explain that,
Okay.
but we have a caller. Hello, good morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I want to contribute on your program. Actually, to start corruption in this Nigeria, it is not going to be an easy. Because you and I are corrupt. Yes. Even the judiciary itself, they are also corrupt. Even the ESCC we are talking about, they are also corrupt.
I think your
So
is too close to the phone. It's a bit too loud.
Hello?
And you need to turn down the volume of your TV set.
Hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead, excuse me.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay. I am talking about the corruption. You see, President Muhammad Buhari has not really done that bad. I think he has tried. There are some extent he has tried to settle the matter. He has to solve the issue of this corruption. But he cannot totally wipe it away. Even his regime can't wipe it away. Because this thing has taken into the marrow of our blood. It's not that easy. Okay, I want to take the issue of plan enhancement. The issue of plan enhancement the issues have been lingering on for a very long time. We are trying to contribute, see how we can be able to tackle it. But it's not working. So, if I want to give President Muhammad Buhari a pass mark, I think has not totally improved concerning the life of the people of this country. I want to talk about the issue of NEPA. Federal government has invested a lot of billions of dollars into that industry, but nothing has. Nothing has done. Who can even have anything done? When are we going to get out of this? The Nigerians, we are so worried about, at this stage, we are still talking about power. Something that is new we can be able to tackle and forget about it and pay for that thing. I am not really impressed.
You need to wrap it up.
I pray one day all these things will become a forgotten history. Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling. You heard what he said. I couldn't put it together.
Yeah, well, I think it just.
But he gave kudos to Mr. President for fighting against corruption, and he said, "Both of you, not me. I'm not corrupt." He said, "Both of you." Oh, I'm not corrupt, please. I don't know. He said, "Both of you talking." So you're the guest. Both of you. Anyway, what he's trying to say, I know what he's trying to say, is that everybody, almost everybody, you cannot generalize when you talk, you know. But he said almost everybody, when you talk about corruption, it has gone deep into the marrows of Nigerians. But my question today is, can we ever change? Can we stop it? Or fight to a minimal, extent? Can we really bring it to where, if you travel outside the country, let me put it for example, Dubai, and you go to shop and you forget your bag. Before buying, they will tell you, before they issue whatever receipts, they will tell you, please, what's your hotel? Because they know you're a foreigner, your room number, and they're going to write it down there. And so if you forget anything, they're going to call that place and say, come and take it, you forgot this. Can we ever see that happen in Nigeria?
We can. It takes work, and it takes that community of purpose. We need to decide, like I said, to start with the I and then walk outward. Right now, we are walking backwards, putting the cart before the horse and saying, oh, okay, corruption is just this problem. Let me chase the guys that have stolen billions.
Shouldn't we chase them?
Of course, we should chase them. But at the same time, we can only chase them effectively if we are also working on the I. Am I above reproach? Am I doing the right thing? Am I chasing them for the right purpose? To make an example. Now, corruption cannot be totally eradicated. And I'll probably say that relying on even the Transparency International reports. The most or the least corrupt country in the world still didn't get a perfect score, because the id, like Sigmund Freud said about man, the id would always play its part. Human beings are innately greedy. Think about self first, okay? But what are the controls in place? And that goes back to the framework. If we put a proper framework in place, we reorientate ourselves, go back to the position of putting hard work, integrity over overnight wealth, then gradually people start appreciating the fact that, okay, if I work hard, I don't cut corners, I'll be successful. As opposed to, it's your time, have fun. When is my time, don't complain.
We're supposed to bring that to play. Where do we start that from? Is it from the home? Is it from the government? Where do we start that from?
From the home. The best way to deal with the self, the I, starts from me. I wake up in the morning, I look in the mirror, and I decide I'm going to be a better person today. And then each person makes that conscious decision. So that means I would respect you even if I don't know you. I would think about your rights and be a bit reluctant to infringe on it. Rather than say, okay, as long as there's no consequence really, then I can get away with it, then I'll move on.
This sort of is more like self-discipline. You have to discipline yourself. But like you said, humans are naturally greedy.
Yes.
What policies should be put in place that could put a check all around, even on the president, those that are being watched, those that are watching?
The system, the framework, the consequence. Now, if we look at most of the countries that we're talking about in terms of countries that seem to have that a bit higher than par morality, you'll find that they have very strict consequences to say, okay, if you are caught and there is a higher possibility that you'll be caught. In other words, the policeman that will come and catch you will not say, okay, hold this one, then no, share them. No. Once you do that, you are increasing the penalty of what you are doing. So when people know that this law is at par, whether I'm rich, whether I'm poor, whether I'm young, whether I'm old, once I am caught, there is an equal consequence for it. Then we'll start working towards change. But for now, I feel if I steal enough to buy myself out of the system, then I'm a better person.
Okay, are you saying that we should introduce capital punishment? Is that?
No,
because some of these countries are still doing that. Should they introduce capital punishment, or how do we go about it?
It's not.
Because we are still going to fall back to the judiciary. And you see lawyers, if you have a case, this lawyer says a different thing, says this is what the law says, and the other one is saying the Constitution didn't say that. So we have different opinions on a particular matter. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you don't get being punished because the innocent one might just be punished anyway. Yeah. So how do we really fight this?
Now, here is what it is. Like I said, once China recently came up with this point system where each of their citizens, in billions, each of their citizens have certain points, which the state deducts for even minor infringements. Jaywalking, the person gets deductions, and it's public. So I might go as a Chinese citizen to an employer, and then he checks my points. And he's like, oh, you jaywalked, you this, you do not meet my standards for morality.
Okay, there are allegations that powerful individuals have been able to influence investigations, influence corruptions. Now, would you advise that our agencies are being independent, having no link or having to get orders from the federal government or the state government?
You see, it's really not my advice. It's actually what the laws are. Law enforcement agencies ordinarily are independent. By creation, they are independent. So in other words, the job of law enforcement agencies' primary job is investigate crimes. So if there is an allegation of a crime, it's their job to investigate whether the crime was committed by the pauper on the streets or the man in the National Assembly. Okay? So it really had nothing to do with independence or subject to some kind of authority. It's enforcing the spirit and the letter of the law, which is once there's an allegation, once there's a reasonable suspicion of a crime, investigate. And if your investigation comes out that the person may be, may be needed to prosecution, prosecute, and then leave the conviction to the courts.
Okay, would you advise that, say, the EFCC is more funded as of now? First, what's your take as regards funding of the EFCC?
Funding of the EFCC, I recall back under President Obasanjo when they passed the law creating the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Right from inception, EFCC has been funded above most law enforcement agencies. That they are probably more funded than the police and the ICPC, because for you to fight corruption, it's going to take someone that is, to an extent, comfortable with himself. In other words, someone that looks at the higher goal than personal comfort, because it's a selfless, it's a service to the nation. But because we were starting off at that point, we are taking baby steps. I think President Obasanjo tried to make EFCC as well funded as possible, which I think the subsequent administrations have retained, to make sure that officers of the agency are comfortable enough to do the job without being influenced by every money that comes, anybody that comes and says, okay, I have this extra for you. So it's still